Okay, let's talk Second Great Awakening. This is a hugely influential event, fluency fact. You know the drill there. So your date range there is from 1790 to 1840. So remember that our First Great Awakening is 1730s to 1760s. Similar to the First Great Awakening, it's a reaction to the growth of science. So similarities there. Major difference from the first is this is a kinder, gentler God that is being presented here. Remember from the First Great Awakening, sinners in the hands of a vengeful God. Remember the quotes about the spider and the rock going through the spider's web, and it's just God's hand that's holding you from damnation. So this is different. So this is portraying God as loving, as benevolent, wants the best for us. He just really wants to help. And the emphasis on individual salvation. And this is going to be really important because this is going to be the jumping off point for a whole bunch of social reforms that we will spend time on next class. So this is the idea that like everyone can have an individual covenant with God, each person has also a covenant to help greater society, to combat sin and evil doing. We're at a point now, we've had enough industrialization. It's easy to look around society and see some pretty dark stuff. So that's going to be the big goal here. It's going to start in camp revival meetings, big focus on the West. You're going to see numbers of Baptists and Methodists surge. So just to give you an example, there in 1770, there are 20 Methodist churches. And by 1860, there are 19,000. So how's that for evidence? You're going to see similar increases in pastors and priests. You're going to see more focus on education as well for those folks. Okay, so notice this red area here. So this is called the burned over district. This is because there are so many churches and so many revivals here that they have to start spreading out. So you can see they're going pretty far west, but it is starting in New York in the burned over district. So it's a new form of revival. So it's not like the First Great Awakening that really was focused on you just go on, the weekend and you experience this sermon for hours. But this is going on night after night after night to kind of build excitement. There's definitely a little bit more showmanship that's happening here. So they're going to be just this really interesting culture that's going on in the room. So they're going to be praying for people by name. So if there was someone in the audience and you knew they were having a hard time, they were questioning their faith, you could yell out their name. And then all of a sudden, everyone is going to be praying for that particular person. And so they're going to be putting all of their energy and their fervor into praying for that individual. That individual will be asked to sit on something called the anxious bench. I think you can probably figure out why it's called the anxious bench. This would probably be a nerve-wracking experience for sure, to have an entire congregation, calling out your name and, praying for God to enter and solve your life's issues. So you'd be sitting on this hard bench, and so everyone would be trying to pour salvation into you through prayer. Big difference from the First Great Awakening. Women are able to testify. They're able to stand up and talk about God in their lives. This is not something we saw in the First Great Awakening. Women were allowed, but they weren't really participating in this kind of way. This is a focus on immediate conversion. So think about if you've ever seen footage of someone speaking in tongues, their body's kind of convulsing because they've been filled with the Spirit of God, that sort of thing. This is a rejection of Calvinism. This is not about predestination. A really famous image, we've seen this on the AP test multiple occasions. So this just shows kind of this, almost kind of this carnival atmosphere. You've brought the whole family, the kids are there playing in the background, and everyone's gathering together near all of these tents. Okay, another image that we've also seen on the AP test. So you can see they've probably been there for a while. The kids are kind of losing it there in the back. So you can see that this would go on for a pretty lengthy amount of time. Also interesting to see how this affects the African American community. We also saw African Americans and slaves in particular being brought to the sermons in the First Great Awakening. So same kind of thing, but you've got integration happening. You've got these slaves that are now attending in these same areas as whites. Again, similar to the First Great Awakening, they're going to latch on to this message of emancipation. So we talked about this last time, but again, this idea of the promise of the kingdom of heaven and rewards in the afterlife and that sort of thing. Northeastern Free Blacks are going to set up their own churches. So a really nice piece of evidence is Richard Allen's Bethel Church. So really famous location. So this had kind of become a hub for freed slaves. So slaves that had been able to buy their own freedom or they had been freed by their masters. So this was a really popular location for some of these hubs. Really important too that this is not just about church, this is not just about praying, this becomes a hub for their entire lives. So this is a way to have more education in the mix, to be able to teach other African Americans how to read, becomes a political center. So when you start drawing these lines to later time periods in history, you can see why someone like Dr. Martin Luther King would come from a church background. So it's starting back here in this time period in the Second Great Awakening. Positive aspects of Great Awakening, you're going to see literacy rates go up in a major way, especially in the South. So remember that Southern literacy rates were always lower than the North. Because remember, if you go all the way back to our Unit 2, remembering our Puritans and the focus on everyone being able to read their own Bible, that they always had higher literacy rates than the South. This is where we start to see Sunday school. And you're going to have a bunch of people called district writers. So they're going to be traveling from town to town, spreading word about these revivals. So transportation will be important here too. This is going to be a vehicle for the abolition movement as well, so stay tuned for more on that. So what does this have to do with the market revolution? We want to try to connect as many things to Unit 4 with the market revolution as we can, because it is the overarching theme of the entire unit. So think of these camp revivals as markets for religion. So this isn't a product per se, but you can also think about competition. You'd have these circuit riders, and they would be, it's very democratizing that everyone can stand up and make their own sermon. You didn't have to be a specific minister or anything like that. Advances in transportation are going to make this a lot more effective. So these ideas are going to spread much faster as a result of, say, inventions like the telegraph, the railroad, steamboats, things like that. So this is going to lead us to early reform movements. So just note that you're going to have positive effects and negative effects from the market revolution, and we're going to be trying to deal with some of those. So if you can pause the video now and see if you can come up with a list of what positive effects would be and negative effects of the market revolution. And we will come back to this list that you make here when we talk about some of the specific reforms that we will be examining at our next class period. But just note that a lot of things on your list should be circling around urbanization. So as you get these bigger cities, what kinds of problems are you seeing? What kind of benefits do you see as well? So hold on for that. Key idea from College Board: increasing number of Americans inspired by new religious and intellectual movements, working outside of government institutions to advance their ideals. This is going to be different from some other reform movements we'll see later, specifically the progressive movement. They're going to be utilizing the government, but that's not what's going on with our Second Great Awakening reforms. So this is being done through other kinds of relief organizations like churches. Americans are forming new voluntary organizations that aim to change individual behaviors and improve society as a whole through temperance and other reform efforts. So again, stay tuned for more on temperance and some other reforms. Make sure that you answer the LEQ prompt in Canvas. So you're going to be comparing the first and second Great Awakening.